Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Wasn't sure where that sentence was going to end. It could have been so many places. I was completely unprepared to answer the question about how I'm doing. That was not where I thought that was going to go. So I don't know. I guess I'm unprepared. How are you?
I am prepared. I knew I was going to do that for you. I was going to set you off edge, and now the show is completely off track. But this is when it's best, Tom. When you have to try to get back on track and try to find your footing. That's when it's best.
You're like the pitchers that stay in the set position just a little too long, and then the batter has to call timeout. I didn't have the option to call timeout. I'm looking around for an umpire. There's no umpire to call. So
I don't like balks. So I am going to set, and I am going to make sure that I am set. Tom, you know what's going to be funny then is that as I edit this, I'm going to cut out like the 3 seconds where there was silence, and people are going to be like, "What's wrong with Tom? This is a normal start of the show. Why is he all flustered?" And so again, that makes you look bad, which makes me look good, and that's really all I want from the show.
Welcome to the Chief and the Spaz podcast.
It changes every week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So today, the reason we were talking to you, one, it's our scheduled Tuesday slot. So there you go. Two, we talked to the running backs today, being running backs coach Tony Alford, redshirt sophomore Master Teague, and graduate transfer Trey Sermon. Tom, I believe this was our first time talking to Trey Sermon. Is that correct?
Yes, it was. We had Trey Sermon came on, and we didn't get a chance to talk to him in the spring because basically spring football stopped before spring football basically started, and then didn't talk to anyone for about 3 months, it felt like. So yeah, we're like slowly getting back. It's like, oh yeah, Chris Olave. When we did the wide receiver, it was like, I haven't seen him in a while. Like, oh yeah, Trey Sermon, he's on the team. Yeah,
I know that guy.
I know that guy. Yeah, I mean, we hadn't talked to Chris Olave since literally the Fiesta Bowl, so there was a lot of catching up when we got to talk to him. And now Trey Sermon was like, oh, hello, you've been on the team for like 7 months now. We've never met. How are you?
Yeah, and first time we talked to Master Teague since his injury. First time we've talked to Tony Alford. We talked to him in like April or May at some point, June or some sort of update. But we talked to him for a half hour today, which is great. But first time, I first want to talk about Master Teague because when I grow up, I want to be Master Teague because this dude is so mature and has gone through so much, had the Achilles injury in the spring. And then, as he said, and then COVID hits, and he's basically by himself training, rehabbing until he can get into an OSU facility when they open some stuff back up. And then he's doing that. And then finally, like the WAC gets opened up. But he's doing so much on his own and comes back faster than anybody expected and talks about how, well, this was a blessing. This allowed me to appreciate things, allowed him to reshape his, tendons, allowed him to become more agile. And for everything that he's gone through, they brought in a running back to maybe start in front of him. And yet all of this, and as you said, other people have had it worse. Many other people have had it worse during this whole thing. And this was just an opportunity for him to get better. And he's happy he's gone through it. And I'm like, holy cow. Like, this is the most mature player I've ever dealt with here.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about 2020 is you don't have to look around very long to find someone who's having a worse year than you. So, I mean, there's always that. Yeah, he has a very just optimistic attitude, and he is a player who is, there are always the guys on the team who are very religious. He is the one who is, maybe the most vocal about his faith of anyone on the team, and his father is as well. And I think that has helped him get through this in a way that it might be harder for other folks to maybe get through it and to kind of keep that positive attitude. But just from the on-field perspective, he talked about the fact that the rehab for this involved a lot of agility drills and, running and quickness and that kind of stuff. And he thinks ultimately that has made him a better player. And, he basically said, you're going to go through stuff. Like life is going to have its bumps, which, yes, fact check, yes, true. And this has been an opportunity to go through and sort of make the most of it in a pretty difficult time, because he suffered that injury during one of the practices we were watching. It was like the first practice of the spring, and then like 4 days later, everything shut down. So he was kind of going through this on his own to a certain degree, in a way you wouldn't during a normal year. And he said he just kind of was able to rebuild himself in a different way, and it was a chance to add some things in his regiment. And that is, if you can turn a negative into a positive, that's as you said, that's a pretty good sign of maturity.
Yeah, and he said himself he wasn't happy with the way things ended last year, and said he wasn't as agile as he wanted to be, and so that's one of the things he worked on. I thought it was interesting. Basically, he said the toughest part was just not knowing if they were going to play. Like that was tougher than the rehab. Like not knowing what the season was going to be, or if there was going to be a season, was tougher than rehabbing from this injury. And it goes back to what we've said in the past: is these guys need destination. They need targets. And going through that rehab, he had that. When that's done and you're just looking for a season and there is no horizon, then you're completely lost. And he said that was the toughest part for him. But then, they get the season back, and now everybody has that same target. And he's such a mature kid. I guess I asked Tony Alford, who's the leader in the room in the running backs room. He said probably Master, but Trey Sermon is answering more questions, and he's picked up the offense very well. He mentioned Xavier Johnson, who we've talked about in the past, walk on 3-star wide receiver, could have gone to like Iowa State or Bowling Green, came to Ohio State, moved to like corner for a while, then running back, then receiver, now back to running back. And so he's started on many special teams last year. He's all over special teams this year. But so those are a few of the leaders in the running back room. But Teague, with a lot of the talk today was how are they going to use them together? And Alfred said, you don't want the same guy. Like, you don't want two of the same guy. And so there are differences between the two of them, but they still have to be able to do the same things. And you can't use two guys unless both guys, like, you'll use whoever is consistent enough. And that's also what he said would be the determining factor in who starts, is who is the most consistent player. And if there are going to be two running backs, they both have to be consistent. And I'm assuming, based on everything we've heard, that that's going to be the case. I did think it was interesting that Alfred said, and I know, whatever Kevin Wilson says, that's fine, but I still need to see it myself before we know who's going to play.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin Wilson, I guess, is ultimately the one who's calling the offense. But I mean, we have heard in the past that it is, when they're sort of dividing up, when it was like J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber and who's going to be in for that drive, it was Tony Alford who was kind of making that decision and how they're going to sort of divvy up that playing time. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting, the idea that he doesn't want the same player. He doesn't want, just the carbon copy of who, whatever the first running back is. You don't want the second guy to be exactly the same, because you want to have sort of complementary skill sets, not identical skill sets, where one guy might be a little bit better. He said basically you have certain core things you have to be able to do. You've got to be able to run between the tackles. You've got to be able to make plays in space. You've got to be able to hold on pass pro. You have to be able to do that. Those are like the table stakes to just be a part of the conversation. But then if there's one guy who's maybe a little better in pass pro and another guy who's maybe a little bit better at, getting out in the passing game and making plays in space, well, you can use that. You can use both guys when you're in a passing situation and you're to keep the back in. You can use both guys when you're going to have a play where the running back's going to come out of the backfield. But if one guy's a little better, well, you can kind of tailor your personnel moves to that. And that makes sense. And I think looking at Trey Sermon versus Master Teague, they're built very differently. So you can see that they're not going to be the exact same guy. Sermon is a decent amount taller. I don't remember exactly how much taller he is on the listed roster, but he's a bigger back than Sermon is, at least, or than Teague is, just in terms of height. So you're going to get a little bit of a different thing, where Sermon's maybe a little bit more of a long strider. Teague might be a little bit more of a, the keep the pads low, run between the tackles guy. But, if they can both do a little bit of everything, then that gives you a little more flexibility. And the same way we've talked about with the linebackers, where someone might be better in terms of run support, someone might be better in terms of pass coverage, that kind of stuff. That just gives you flexibility, which is what they look for just about everywhere on the field.
Yeah, Trey Sermon listed at 6'1", 215. Master Teague, 5'11", 225.
Is there a winking face next to the 5'11"? Because I'm not sure I buy all 5'11" of that.
We'll get back to that real quick. How tall did Tony Alford say Mayan Williams was?
I think he said he was 2.5 feet tall. Speaking of winking faces, Tony Alford is always a lot of fun, because Tony Alford will every once in a while say something and it's like, should I type this out and tweet it out? Because it's like, if you don't know he's joking, it's going to read real mean.
Well, there's video of him last year messing around with J.K. Dobbins and saying, I hate J.K. And obviously that's not the case. But it was interesting. He said that during recruiting or whatever, like the Ohio State coaches talk to these players like they talk to their own sons and daughters, and there's that playful relationship that they all have, and clearly he loves Mayan Williams. But getting back to Master Teague and Trey Sermon, 6'1", is considered a tall running back, so they're working on getting him to play lower. Sermon did say, hey, yeah, I'm aware that I'm a taller running back, so yes, that is something that I work on. And now that they're finally in pads, they are able to finally work on getting their pads lower, because that was something that Ryan Day has said you can't do. Like, they've worked on, playing lower, but you don't exactly know how low you need to get until those pads are on, and you start working against other guys whose pads are on who are also trying to get low, and low man wins. And sometimes you're not as low as you think you are. And so this gets them used to being that low man. Alfred said Trey Sermon is a long strider. We know he's a good pass catcher. That was one of the things Sermon said he liked about this offense. He said it was similar to Oklahoma's offense, and he likes the way they use the running backs in routes. We've seen that with J.K. Dobbins. We might see that even more this year with Sermon. But I wonder how that suits Master Teague, because we really haven't seen him do much of that. I think he had maybe like one long catch and run last year, but it's not really something they do in the fourth quarter when they're trying to run out the clock.
Right. I mean, that's the whole, if you're the backup guy and you have as many yards rushing in the fourth quarter, as like most Big Ten backs have during the course of the whole season, like, yeah, you're in there in the fourth quarter because they're up by 40 points and just trying to run out the game. So it's not necessarily a function of him not being able to do it. It's just, they didn't need him to do it. So that was, that's something that I think you're going to see more from him this year. One thing, getting back real quickly to the guys running too high, Tony Alford had a great quote on how do you fix it when a guy isn't getting his pads down? The exact quote was, get somebody to take his face off him if he's running too high. So just, live practice will sort that out pretty quickly. You will know if you're running too high when you're going backwards and, when you're going forwards and all of a sudden you're going backwards. Like that solves that problem pretty quickly. So that, as you said, that's not something you can necessarily do just during drills, but once the running backs are live, that's something you can figure out pretty quickly.
Another tall guy, Steel Chambers. Alfred said he's like 223, 224 pounds. Right now in the roster, he is also listed at 6'1". That's a guy who I wouldn't mind seeing just what can he do with 200 carries in a year, because he is different than anybody Ohio State has had, maybe since like Rod Smith. I guess they would be similar. He's a taller, bigger guy, just an interesting athlete there. I don't know that we'll ever see him get to 200, but it would seem like he is the number 3 guy right now. Alfred called him a perfectionist, which is good, but can also be harmful if things aren't going the way he wants. But the good thing there with Steel Chambers is Tony Alford said he's completely comfortable putting him in a game. So when you've got the pair and a spare, as we know, that's what you need.
That's all you need. That's the only thing you need to have a football team is a pair and a spare at running back. So, all right, good. They're all set. Nothing to worry about now.
Yes.
Yeah, it did sound like Steel Chambers has come a long way in a relatively short amount of time. He was like the third, maybe the fourth running back, because he was probably behind Marcus Crowley last year until Crowley got hurt. He only played in the 4 games that he got that he could keep his red shirt on, but you saw little flashes from him, and he's someone who he very well could have been a really, really good linebacker for Ohio State too. He played both ways in high school, and very tough physical player, big enough to maybe run some people over in the running game. I'm intrigued by him. If Crowley can't come back and it is Trey Sermon and Master Teague, and then he's the third guy this year, I could see him having some pretty big fourth quarters against, Rutgers and Maryland and all the teams that Master Teague kind of ran his numbers up against last year. I could see Steel Chambers potentially being that guy for them this year.
Yeah, and there was a minor setback with Crowley sometime in the past, which helps explain why it has taken almost 11 months at this point for him to get back from his ACL tear. So that helps explain that. Alford said, he is a little bit surprised that Teague returned from his Achilles faster than Crowley has returned from his ACL, but there's factors there. One being Teague is crazy in terms of his ability to rehab, and the other being that Marcus Crowley had a setback. So that's those guys. And then Mayan Williams, who all 2.5 feet of him, when he had his black stripe removed, you heard his teammates calling him Meatball. So the name and the image certainly fit. It's not like one of those things where you call a big guy tiny. This is not an ironic title. This is a very fitting one. And I think he's another guy we'll obviously get to see in the fourth quarter. He said he gets lost behind the line of scrimmage at times, and defenses can't see where he is, and so there's some deceptiveness there. But he's a hard runner when you're now. He's listed at 5'8", 227. Tom, 25 years ago, Ohio State had a running back who was listed at 227 pounds, except he was 7 inches taller, and his name was Eddie George, and he ended up winning a Heisman. So you've got 5'8" Mayan Williams, who's probably dropped, 13, 15 pounds from maybe where he was in high school. And that's why there was also some doubts about his explosion and was he really an Ohio State running back. So now you got this guy who looks like a college running back, not the tallest guy, but Ohio State doesn't, they haven't had a lot of tall running backs lately anyway, so I don't know that height really matters. Like J.K. Dobbins is probably 5'9.5". He seems to be doing okay. I think he's going to make it as an Ohio State Buckeye. So this Mayan Williams kid, who, a late addition, will now have to keep from being recruited over, basically, because there are, some top-notch recruits coming, and he knows all of this. And he the whole fallback plan, they didn't get Bijan Robinson, so they ended up with Mayan Williams. He's heard all of that, and there are a lot of guys who are fueled on this team. He's another one, and just because there's 3 or 4 guys ahead of him, that's not really going to slow him down. He's just going to continue to work at his pace and the pace set for him, and there may not be a lot of snaps, but it's not going to be because of lack of effort.
He's someone who comes into this year, I think, and he knows exactly where he is and what he has ahead of him, where you've got 2 real good running backs, Trevion Henderson and Evan Pryor, coming in 2021. So you kind of have to get yourself established as much as you can this year to sort of give yourself a little bit of a lead on those guys when they come in, because you don't want to get passed by the guys who are behind you. That's a route to not getting on the field much at all and during your career. So you got to kind of get yourself ahead and give yourself enough of a lead to stay ahead of guys behind you. And it seems like he's done that. I mean, he came in, they've talked about the fact that he came in fantastic shape, and he's really come in as motivated as you can be. And, Alford said it took him a little while to get up to speed with the playbook, but the quote was, he's come a long way in the past week or so. I'm pleased with him and where he's going. So I mean, that sounds like someone who can at least get on the field during some of those fourth quarters, start building up some reps, start building up a little bit of film, and give himself an opportunity to be in that rotation next year. Maybe he is the Steel Chambers, the third guy in the rotation next year. When Trey Sermon goes, and theoretically, if Master Teague has a big year, Master Teague could go after this year. But that's a crowded room. This is not wide receiver where you're gonna play six of those guys as quote unquote starters. So you've got to kind of work your way up that depth chart and maybe pass the guys ahead of you, a couple of them, and then stay ahead of the guys behind you. He has the opportunity to do that, to sort of put himself in that kind of a position this year. But we'll see. And here's the thing about running backs: they don't all stay healthy. They all take a ton of hits. So someone is probably going to get hurt this year. That's just kind of how it goes every year. And if he is ready to take that step and be a contributor at that point, then that sets him up pretty well for the long term.
Yeah, and you consider Trey Sermon injury history, Master Teague now injury history, Marcus Crowley currently dealing with an injury. So there is that to keep an eye on, and it could happen. Alfred said Mayan Williams likes to put his face on people, which is good in football, not good in like everyday life.
Especially now, yes,
especially now. So there is that. He's a contact seeker, which is also what you like to hear from the running back, unless he's like 5'8", 170. Those guys, you want them to be contact avoiders, but at least he has the stature to take those guys on. Master Teague was asked if the Clemson game drives him, because I think that's what we're all kind of reminded of, and just the way his season ended, and not just against Clemson, but in the last few games there, where the drop off from JK was just so stark. And yeah, he said that obviously it wasn't his best. That definitely wasn't a performance I want to have. You hate to go through something and learn from it. You'd like to learn first and then go from there. It's something that I've thought about, and I want to display that I can make those plays in the heat of the moment. Yes, it is always best to learn it before you do it, but rarely are we, I guess, that fortunate in all walks of life. And so he certainly got a lesson in that game. And that was one of the reasons he wanted to become a more agile running back. And it was just so different watching JK and Master at the end of last season, where it almost seemed like Master could only go in one direction, whereas JK could go in at any point. And Teague also said, you learn a lot from sitting behind and watching J.K. Dobbins, like how he does everything, how he works. I imagine you also watch him go, wish I could do some of that. Why don't I work on doing some of that? And so I'm hoping fans who have not necessarily written him off, but have kind of moved on a little bit and figured that's all he is what he was last year. It sure seems like he doesn't view himself as that last year. And he views himself as a new running back. And to this point, he's done everything. He's completely healthy. He said the only issue is just getting back in pads and carrying the ball, because they haven't done it since January.
Right. Yeah. He was asked how the Achilles is doing with practices, and he said the Achilles is fine. Like that's not the issue. It's just getting back to getting hit. Like they have not been in pads since. Had they had a padded practice since the Fiesta Bowl? I don't think they had. Where they didn't really have one in the spring. They didn't have any over the summer. So they're just now getting back to them in the first time, just in the last week, and just getting used to, oh, right, now there are people hitting me very hard, and they're big and they're strong, and they're coming very hard, and physics says ouch. And, that takes a little while to get used to. I mean, Justin Fields was asked last week, are you going to get hit at all during practice and just to sort of get you ready for the season? He's like, no, I'd still prefer not. Like, no, think I'm going to wait a little longer. That's not an option at running back. They do not have no contact jerseys for guys who are healthy running backs. So you get thrown into the deep end of the pool there with that, and that's a little bit of an adjustment for him. But last year the sort of the book on Teague was just kind of like, he's fine in a straight line. Like if you can make him have to move, if you can make him have to cut, all of a sudden he's not quite the same back. And that's where that agility training that he did during the offseason comes in. I'm interested to see what he looks like this fall, if there is a noticeable difference in that, in his ability to cut, and his ability to kind of, stop, change direction, be shifty, make a guy miss, not just have to just run in a straight line and, maybe run over someone. That was something that seemed like at times it was missing from his game last year. If he can sort of pick that up a little bit and, add that to his arsenal, I mean, he had a pretty darn good freshman year. I mean, he was where did he end up in the Big Ten? He was like 5th or 6th in the Big Ten in rushing at one point, kind of late in the season. I think he tailed off a little bit towards the end of the year. But, that if you're the backup and you're in the, and comfortably inside the top 10 in the Big Ten in rushing yards, like halfway through the season or more, like, yeah, that's a pretty good season.
Yeah, he finished 11th in the conference, 789 yards rushing, 60.69 yards per game.
Nice.
Yep. But yeah, you're right. He did tail off at the end. If I go back and look at like November, he's 17th. So that's a bad example. Let's look at October last year and see where Master Teague is. Oh, he was 5th, right behind Jonathan Taylor. So,
who?
Yeah, he played for Wisconsin. It's not important right now.
What position?
Running back, yes.
Is it the kid from Home Improvement?
No.
Okay.
You're thinking of I don't want to get into it, Tom. I don't like ABC comedies. I've said this on the show many times. I do not like Full House. I do not like any of those. I don't like them. Tom, let's go back to football. I was looking back, I don't know, months ago at the last time, like when Ohio State has backup running backs who rush for as many yards as backups as Master Teague did, like they go on to like then become great and produce. And honestly, there aren't many, if any, who did what he did last year. Now you bring in somebody else who's going to want to carry the ball. Maybe they end up with 140 carries apiece, something like that. And, well, maybe not this year, but he is the kind of teammate who can share. And Trey Sermon has only known that in his career, sharing and then not being able to share anymore because he's not being involved in the game plan or in the offense, as we saw at the end, as we saw last year, and then he was injured and lost for the season. So these are two guys who are comfortable helping each other out and working together. So I assume it's going to go pretty smoothly. I don't really have any concerns about any rifts or, selfishness or anything like that. And as Tony Alford has said before, it's not his job to make running backs happy, Tom. It's running back's job to make him happy. And so that's what these guys are going to have to do in order to even, be the other guy, to be the 50-50 or to be the 60-40. Like, it's not just going to be handed to them. They're going to have to prove that they are, like, there's no significant step down. If there's a step down, then you might only get one series just to give the other guy a rest, as we would see like last year. But if there's no step down, then I do wonder if there's some if there's some trepidation on Alfred's part based on the 2018 season of alternating series, even though there are other reasons why that running game suffered, including
you almost said offensive line there. Why was that?
There is that. There's the offensive line. There's a lack of a running quarterback. There's J.K. Dobbins trying to, hit a home run on every snap. And I do wonder how much talk there is about that aspect of it. Like, you could just do your job. Don't worry about busting a big run on every snap because it's not going to happen. And if you're trying, there's going to be the returns just aren't going to be there. And so at least there, as this program always talks about the testimony, there's also testimony of bad things. And that would be one of them to watch out for.
Well, I think a lot of the things from that 2018 season are fixed now for 2020. You've got a running quarterback. You have a better offensive line. These are both good, solid running backs. I mean, J.K. Dobbins last year was not the same J.K. Dobbins as he was in 2018. He was a far better running back in 2019 than he was in 2018. But, he was solid in 2018. And if Master Teague is now, or Trey Sermon is now where J.K. Dobbins was in 2018, then you're going to have a better season out of them this year than you got out of Dobbins, just because of all the other stuff. Because you do have Fields, who's going to run at least some. You do have a better offensive line. You do have probably a better receiving core, or you could have a better receiving core where you can't focus on the run game as much as you might have in 2018. So all of that stuff adds up to this should be a pretty darn good team, even if the running backs are maybe not quite as good as Dobbins was in 2018, or maybe not quite as good as Weber was in 2018. I mean, that was a good, solid team, but there are definitely lessons to be learned from there. I will be interested to see what the rotation at running back looks like this year. If they do it the same way they did in 2018, I suspect that they may not do it quite that way. I mean, that seemed like that was a pretty just first guy, second guy, first guy, second guy, first guy, second guy, rather than just kind of riding the hot hand, which, I mean, I get it. Like you want to keep everyone happy, even though he says that he doesn't want to keep that's not his goal, is to keep everyone happy. But, I think they didn't want to just kind of bury one guy on the bench, and you didn't necessarily have the production that merited burying one guy on the bench that year. But it'll be interesting to see what it looks like this year in terms of how they divvy up those carries.
I could see a Master Teague starting a drive, then there's like a 3rd and 6, and you bring in Sermon or something as the third down back, and then he stays in until for 5 or 6 plays until there's an incompletion, and then maybe Teague comes back. I don't know that you need to do it every other drive or just that regimented. So we will see how that goes. Anything else from the running backs, Tom, that you want to touch on before we close with some listener questions?
Sermon did say it was a little weird to watch his former teammates at Oklahoma play the last couple of weeks while he was still waiting to start for the Buckeyes. No one asked the question that I was going to ask, which was, what's it like practicing against a team that has a defense now? Is that weird? Is that weird to go against a defense in practice? But no one asked that question, so that's okay. Let's do some listener questions. First one from Mount P Buckeye. How active are the running backs in the pass game? Are they mainly check down options, or do the coaches have them out there running routes? And he said he probably won't get many scheme-specific answers out of them, but he's curious if they're running more gap power stuff this year to play more to the strengths of Teague as a runner. Sermon is also a pretty physical runner as well.
I continue to go back to what Baker Mayfield did against this defense in 2017, throwing to the running backs. And that's some of what I envision for maybe Sermon. I do expect them not to just be checkdowns, but there's so many different guys running around in this offense in terms, running around in these passing lanes, and they have ways of clearing stuff out for guys and clearing out the middle you can just see a running back just streaking down the middle of the field and there being a linebacker, trying to stay with them. So I do expect the running backs to be more than just check downs and dump offs at times. At times they won't be, obviously. And I do think that while Teague has reshaped what he does, you're still going to play to your guys' strengths.
Yeah, and that's something that I think you're gonna for sure see. I mean, that's something they've basically said. Like they don't want the exact same guy, and that means the reason is you are gonna put them in a position to do the thing that they do best. So yeah, I think that's probably a pretty safe bet. From Arc 23, he's got a four-parter. Who do you think you are, Tim May? Come on. Number 1, will Mayan Williams get meaningful snaps this year? I say, well, let's define meaningful, I guess. Meaningful meaning with the score less than, with the score within 2 touchdowns. I don't think that they probably will, but he's probably on the field. He's probably on the field with, barring like a cataclysmic running back situation, he's probably on the field at least in, the fourth quarters of games where it's a 30-point game and it's not just like it's him and the walk-ons out there. I would see him out there in, with the second team offensive line at times, right?
Yeah. Tom, over under first quarter carries for Mayan Williams, 0.5.
Probably under, I would say. I mean, you never say never, but the path to Mayan Williams getting first quarter carries probably involves multiple running back injuries or some sort of significant COVID outbreak. Like if Mayan Williams is getting first quarter carries this year, it's probably not a good thing for Ohio State.
Yeah, that bet would be taken off the board if it became likely to be an over. So don't worry. But even like first half, like what's the over under on first half carries? I don't know that it's much more than 0.5.
No, probably not. He seems like, I mean, let's run down the depth chart. You've got Sermon and Teague, which is 1 and 1A in some order. Then you've got Steel Chambers / Marcus Crowley if he's healthy. I mean, when does the 4th/5th running back typically get their first carry in a game? I mean, that's third quarter would be pretty early in most cases, assuming you've got 3 to 4 of those guys ahead of him healthy. Like you didn't see Steel Chambers getting a lot of first half carries last year.
Yeah, and when Tony Alford talks about consistency, Xavier Johnson is going to be more consistent than Mayan Williams right now. So if the game is still on the line, they're going to be using Johnson before Williams.
Yeah. So I mean, you have 4 to 5 guys ahead of him. Then I mean, that's you're not going to see. That doesn't mean he won't be a good back down the line. That just means there's a lot of guys in front of him in line. It's like when the Secretary of Agriculture. What's the over under on the Secretary of Agriculture being next in line of the presidential succession? Like, well, it's kind of down the line a little ways. So
I don't even know how many carries like Marcus Crowley had in the first half or first quarter last year. I could probably dig that up, but it's certainly not a statement on them and what they did.
Well, how many true freshmen running backs have gotten first quarter carries for Ohio State in the last 10 years? J.K. Dobbins might be the end of the list there. I'm not coming up with anyone else just jumping off the.
Here you go. Marcus Crowley last year, the earliest carry was 1 third quarter carry, and then 24 fourth quarter carries. So that's a guy that they really like, and there was really no use for him early on. And Teague, I'll just do it real quick here, and then we can move on. Teague carried the ball 3 times in the first quarter last year, 17 times in the second quarter.
Yeah, and that's Master Teague, 3 times in the first quarter all year. And they were up by 1,000,000 points in some of those games. So, yeah, that's I am more confident than ever in my first half over under the 0.5 for Mayan Williams this year. Number 2, which OSU player takes the biggest leap into stardom? Do you want to take Zach Harrison, or do you want to take Jackson Smith-Njigba, or do you want to take Garrett Wilson?
Well, I don't know that we can consider Jackson Smith-Njigba a leap because he's already there. So you've got to go from a starting point, and then leap somewhere. He has not leapt anywhere. This is just where he is. The leap for him to something more would be tough because he's already very high. We know that, Tom. You go first, and then maybe I'll think of somebody, but it's probably going to be Zach Harrison.
Yeah, I was going to say Zach Harrison is the first guy that jumps off the page to me. I mean, this is the same conversation we've had. I feel like we've answered this question a few times during the course of the year because there hasn't been a whole lot of football to talk about. It turns out over the last 18 months or whatever it has been. That's what it feels like for an off season. Yeah, I mean, Zach Harrison is right on track with those Chase Young sack numbers and tackle numbers and TFL numbers from his freshman year. And, Chase Young had a pretty darn good sophomore year, and he finished with, 9.5 sacks, I think, his sophomore year, Chase Young. And that was on 2 bum ankles. So, if Zach Harrison finishes with, whatever the short season equivalent of 9.5 sacks is this year, figure 7-8 sacks this year in the limited games he has. That will count as a move to stardom, and I think that's reasonable. I mean, there's some other questions on that defensive line that we can probably get to with one of the questions later on, but I think Zach Harrison is pretty clearly the answer to me. It's always just you look for the guy in his sophomore year who's going to make that leap. And I think there's a wide receiver who's a sophomore that is probably a pretty good answer for that I left for you as well.
Yes, Garrett Wilson is going to be outrageous this year. I think he's going to be spectacular. The numbers will be, it won't be 100 catches. It won't be 80 catches. It might only be may only be 50, may not even be 50. But I think, Tom, for me, he's like the Kyle Pitts of wide receivers.
Well, then we're going to skip Ark's question, third and fourth question. We're going to go to Muzz's question, then we'll come back to Ark's next two questions. Muzz says, I assume you've both seen Kyle Pitts out of Florida play this year. Yeah. He's nearly a Heisman candidate at this point. My question is, it is a Heisman candidate tight end more valuable than, and he says more valuable than a Heisman candidate tight end. I assume he means more valuable than a Heisman candidate quarterback or running back. I always want Ohio State to recruit the best tight end each year, as I think the size, speed, strength combo a tight end offers to an offense creates so many options. So hang up and listen.
First of all, I think the idea of a Heisman tight end being a Heisman candidate is silly. However, Kyle Pitts is catching 3 touchdowns a game right now. So if he finishes the season with like 33 touchdown catches, I will digress. And, he's averaging 100 yards, like 106 yards receiving a game. So if he puts up like 1,200 yards, 33 touchdowns, okay, like if you're Michael Crabtree, that's fine. Then you can be, top 2, top 3 in the Heisman. But I do get annoyed because I go back to when Kellen Winslow was playing and Kirk Herbstreit was, this guy's a Heisman shoe and he's my Heisman pick right now. How many receivers put up gigantic numbers but they aren't real candidates unless they are also in the return game? That's what separates them from everybody else. And that's what really makes them Heisman candidates. And as far as I know, Kyle Pitts is not in the return game, so he is basically eliminated just as any wide receiver would be. So I don't like I disagree with the premise of any tight end being a Heisman candidate. However, it's good to have him.
Yeah, I mean that it's certainly that is certainly a weapon that any team would take. I'm thinking back right now. Has there been a Heisman winner as a wide receiver since Desmond Howard?
No,
I don't think there has.
Crabtree,
right?
I think, finished maybe second, and he was I think that's about it.
Yeah, and I mean,
he had Tim Brown in '88.
Yeah, but that 1988 famously before 1991.
No,
so yes,
just give you another example, and his numbers were very,
Yeah, and that was someone who did a lot of damage on special teams. So, I mean, if you want to count Charles Woodson as a receiver, because he did play some receiver.
That's the only reason he won it. So it wasn't because of his defense.
Yeah. So I mean, yes, if Kyle Pitts can get John Cooper to punt him the football, then yes, he has a chance at the Heisman this year. I think that's the big takeaway. Too soon. Sorry, I keep forgetting who our audience is. Sorry, everybody. Back to ARC 23. What will happen at 3 Tech for Ohio State this year? And the answer is that's Tony is taking a big sip of water right now because he doesn't want to answer the question. Yeah, that is, I think right now, that's the biggest point of concern for Ohio State, because you have some questions. I mean, coming into the year is probably going to be Teron Vincent, Haskell Garrett, Jerron Cage, some combination of those 3 guys. Lost Jashawn Cornell last year. He was someone who I think was a little bit underappreciated in what he did. But, I mean, Haskell Garrett is expected to play this year. We don't know exactly when he's going to be out there again. I mean, he had obviously the incident where he was trying to break up a man and a woman fighting and got shot in the face. And so that is not one of those things that it's like, well, okay, pulled hamstring, you're going to be out this long. It's like, well, that's not one. Thankfully, that's not something that there is a real frequent recovery path that we have to deal with. So you don't know exactly when he's going to be back on the field. Teron Vincent was not out there on Saturday when we were at practice. We don't quite know exactly what his situation is, if he's going to be 100% ready to go, if there's lingering issues with the shoulder. It's not great. So then you're down to potentially Jerron Cage, who is this is his junior year. Hasn't done a whole lot. He's played some second half snaps. He had a fumble recovery against Maryland last year. So he's played, but he has not been a regular contributor. And you're to the point where there's not a ton of depth there. Hopefully Haskell Garrett is back this year and can play relatively early in the season. If Haskell Garrett is somewhere close to 100% at Penn State, that is a big, big asset for them. But, right now, to me, that might be the biggest lingering question for this defense outside, maybe even more so than who's going to be that second corner that steps up, because there are at least a couple 100% healthy options there.
Yeah, I agree. And we talked to Larry Johnson on Wednesday, so we'll get a bunch of updates on what the situation is there, because you also have redshirt freshman Jade McKenzie, redshirt freshman Cormonte Hamilton, and I don't, it's fine to move players around, but when you move a tight end to defensive tackle, I don't really expect much from that defensive tackle. I think Antoine Jackson he may have to play some 3-tech and move back and forth. I'll ask tomorrow, is there any chance of moving a defensive end? Are you moving Tyler Friday over to 3-tech? Something like that, just to help out. And I guess if there's no plan to do that, that either says that they don't think he can do it or that they don't need him. And I guess that would be a follow-up. So what? You don't think he could do
it? Here's the other problem. This conversation is happening with less than 3 weeks to go before the season. So it's not like you can just, if you're moving someone in March, then it's like, you can put them on the 8,000 calorie a day diet that Javonte Jean-Baptiste was on for a while, or, Nick Petit-Frere was on for a while. Like there is a bulk 'em up diet, but that does not happen overnight. I mean, you certainly can't gain good weight that quickly, as anyone who had a little too much money on their Buckeye D maybe found out in the Union. We all had a freshman year, friends. We all had a freshman year. So yes.
Real quick, Tom. And I say real quick, even though I forgot what I was going to say, I was just trying to interrupt you so you wouldn't move on.
You didn't want to hear me talk about Mark Pies. That's okay. Understandable.
I never had Mark Pies at the Union, even though it always looked great. I was more of just give me my chicken soft tacos at the Taco Bell. Sometimes I do at Wendy's if I want to sit down for something fancy.
Something classy. Yeah.
Something classy. No, I don't have what I was going to say.
Well, I will let you know that nothing had a more disappointing smell to taste ratio than Mark Pies, because you walked past Mark Pies and it was like, oh my gosh, that smells fantastic. And you'd eat it. It was like, that was not all that I hoped that it would be. So yeah, that was RIP the old Union Mark Pies. Mourn you till we join you. Last one from ARC23. What player is getting the most buzz from your sources? While you're thinking, I'll say Jackson Smith and Jigba, which
I'm trying to think of somebody else.
I was going to say, he's getting the most buzz from you. He's getting the most buzz from me. He was someone that Alex named in his A-Deck column this week as someone he was hearing a lot of good things about. And I don't think he's just hearing that from us. I think he's hearing that. G. Scott also is someone that Alex mentioned. I mean, and all of those freshman wide receivers, all 4 of those freshman wide receivers are going to be good. And I think there is, people, probably Mookie Cooper will be the one that plays the least. And that's just a function of he's got some real talented guys ahead of him on the depth chart at H, which, that is not the worst thing in the world. And that was something that Brian Hartline said. Basically, everyone has their own path. It doesn't, just because you're not playing as a true freshman and you might be not getting as many snaps as some of the other guys, doesn't mean you're not going to be good later. And he had, he didn't play last year. He had all that stuff going on. So he's got the deck is a little stacked against him this year. But yeah, all 4 of those guys are people that, I think I'm hearing, and I'm guessing you're also hearing some pretty good things about.
Yeah, defensively, I would say maybe somebody who goes against him in practice, which would be Marcus Williamson. He's a guy we're hearing good stuff about. But really, any year, Jackson Smith and Jigba would be the talk of camp from what we're hearing, and maybe G. Scott would if there wasn't also Jackson Smith and Jigba, and both of those guys are going to be very involved in the offense and will make some plays this year, and will just surprise people who don't always pay attention to who are the freshmen. So for maybe the casual or the passive Ohio State fan, those are going to be some of the new stars moving forward that are like, oh, so this guy's a freshman? That's pretty cool. Now I'm back to my wine.
So we'll hop over to Twitter now. Those were our questions from our insiders board. Let's hop over to Twitter at Mr_Mike42 asked about concern at the 3-tech defensive tackle. We talked about that. At Chris_Bonar, Bonar, any additional info on what's going on with DeMario would be great. And I will tell you, we just talked to Tony Alford, and his name didn't come up in the conversation with the running backs, but he did come up, obviously, and we did get to talk to him a little bit last week with the wide receivers. I'll let you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, at one point he was asked, has it been frustrating in your career not finding a role, and he said it has been frustrating. And from our vantage point on Saturday, he was not at practice during our viewing window. He may have shown up after that. I don't believe that he did. So there are some issues there that probably won't be answered by anybody in terms of the coaching staff. And I probably could have asked, or one of us could have asked Tony Alford and gotten I'm not going to talk about that. So yeah, it's a weird balance of I want information, but I also don't want to throw away my opportunity to ask questions here because we only get so many as this roulette runs through. So yeah, nothing new, but I would expect, it won't be too much longer before we hear something in it. And when we talk to Day, do we talk to him on Friday this week or no?
I don't remember. The Thursday interviews are Wednesday this week. That's really thrown off my feng shui for the week. So we're talking to Larry Johnson tomorrow. We'll have the Ryan Day radio show on Thursday.
I'll call in as a guest.
There you go.
As a caller.
Tony, they don't take questions anymore. You'll have to tweet it into them.
They have to be blocked.
Yeah, we'll see if we get an answer on DeMario this week.
But that would be a good question for Ryan Day because he at least as the head coach, like Tony Alford's not going to want to speak for the head coach in that instance, but Ryan Day can say, yeah, there's some issues, or no, he's fine, he's good. We had a talk, and there has been no issues, and he's been fine. And so yeah, no, long answer short.
Yeah. DeMario McCall, question mark. Maybe, exclamation point.
I'm looking forward to the transcription of this. I'll see what this get to read what I just said there, because who knows what it was.
Parentheses, indecipherable grunting. But that's the entire podcast. So
yes.
Last one from @VanGo_0. Are they excited to be playing in cold weather games when the passing game will be limited and the running game will have to carry the team?
And that was about the running backs today. Yes, I would assume so. All running backs want the ball more. And so, yes, I think that would be exciting for them to get that extra load. And obviously, Tom, the offensive line prefers that as well. The offensive line loves to run the ball, and weather isn't really a concern for them. And we've seen year after year, except for 2018, when an offensive line does dominate an opponent, it just builds and builds and builds, kind of like a snowball down a hill.
Snowballs also famously enjoy the cold weather. See?
Yes.
Yeah. This is the old, all the TV people who don't have anything else to say will say, "Oh, Big Ten weather is coming." Oh, and that just means, okay, it's going to be below 50 degrees and it's going to be a little windy, and so you can't just throw it like you can in a dome. Which, okay, yeah, that's true. Ohio State's passing numbers have tailed off a little bit towards the end of the year in recent years as a function of that weather. They've still been able to throw the ball. It's not like it's going to be minus 15 on December 10th or something like that. I guess they're going to be up in East Lansing, so maybe it will be. I don't know. I guess I shouldn't say that definitively, but it's not going to be freezing cold and snowing sideways for every single one of those games. So if it's 40 degrees and it's sort of like typical Ohio State, Michigan kind of weather, like they can throw the ball fine. Ohio State has famously not had a whole lot of trouble throwing the ball against Michigan the last couple of years. So I think they'll be okay with that. But this team is definitely better equipped to perform in cold, crappy weather than some of the recent teams, just because they do have such a good offensive line. They do have wide receivers where you're not going to want to throw the ball 50 yards in the air downfield when it's cold and snowy like that. You can throw some shorter passes, and they have wide receivers who can take those shorter passes and turn them into bigger plays. So between the good running backs, the good offensive line, and wide receivers who can do, turn something, just a little bit into something big, all of those things add up to a team that probably will do just fine no matter what the weather is this year.
It also helps, and a lot of the reason the numbers tailed off is because you're dealing with Braxton Miller and JT Barrett. The numbers, I think, were just fine under Dwayne Haskins. And when you've got Justin Fields, who can also cut through that kind of weather and the blusteriness of it, I think you're okay. I'm looking at the stats from each month last year. And, Tom, in October, Ohio State only threw for 191 yards a game, which tells me Maybe they're just crushing people on the ground. But in November, that jumped up to 300 yards a game, which is, that's just fine.
More.
Yes, and 16 touchdowns, no interceptions in those 4 games. So pretty good. And then December and January, which was 2 games, they threw for 320 yards a game. Both of those games, of course, were in domes. But yeah, it's not going to be great playing, and the potential is there for it to be really bad. But that's kind of almost any year, and it's a rarity when there are issues. And I don't know, you're talking 2 more weeks. I mean, it just depends. It's going to be a complete crapshoot on whether the weather is fine or because there have been games where it's been fine, and then 3 days later you're talking like 8 degrees outside, and nobody would want to be out there. So it's complete crapshoot. Nobody knows.
Yeah, I mean, the last 3 games of the year are, if you were going to have a problem, these are games where you might have a problem. I mean, you go to Champaign, Illinois. That's famously a place gets a little blustery from time to time, especially after Thanksgiving. So that could be a little bit of an issue. You go to East Lansing, that could be an issue. Michigan at home. I mean, December 12th in Columbus. Like, think about if you've gone and done the Christmas lights at the zoo. Sometimes that weekend is 55 degrees and sunny, and sometimes it's snowing and 20. Like, which one is it going to be this year? I mean, the weatherman can't tell you what it's going to do 6 days from now, so I'm not going to go and make a prediction about 3 months from now. But I think it's certainly possible that weather will be a major impact in one of those games, maybe 2, but you can't really predict it. And Illinois and Michigan State are not teams that, if anything's going to give them an issue, it's going to be the weather. It's not going to be the opposition at Illinois, at Michigan State this year.
Yeah, I'm looking at the weather for Columbus last year, December 12th. It was 41 degrees.
Yeah, so and that's a Michigan game. I mean, this is only, like you said, it's 2 extra weeks outside. It's not like the temperature goes off a cliff as soon as a page turns to December. So, I mean, if you put it, when you're putting your Christmas lights up, what kind of day is that typically like? I mean, it's chilly, but it's not freezing cold.
At January 2nd, 61 degrees. Because I remember being, whenever we go to bowl games, when we went to the Stinking Rose Bowl, went to the Fiesta Bowl, both times it was warmer back in Columbus than it would be in California or Arizona. So what they need to do, Tom, move the season back even further. Play in January when it's nice out, for crying out loud.
January in Columbus, shorts weather.
Anything else, Tom, before we get out of here?
No, I think we're good. We'll get to talk to Larry Johnson on Wednesday and some of the defensive linemen. I think they gave us like 5 or 6 names of players we'll get to talk to, so that should be quite a long and interesting interview session, and we'll have another episode coming up on Thursday, and plus we'll have another one of our weekly National College Football preview shows for our Patreon subscribers. If you want to get an extra episode of Buckeye Weekly in your ears this week, you can go to patreon.com/Buckeye Weekly. Sign up right there. Here's a little hint on Patreon. They don't bill you till the first of the month, so you can get a couple weeks of freebies. See if you like it before you see. This is me giving you a little life hack. Sign up now. See if you like it. If you don't like it, cancel before the first, and you don't actually get billed. But those plans start at $5 a month. So that's might be a good time to do it, because it seems like this is going to be a pretty interesting month of Ohio State football. So that's patreon.com/Buckeye Weekly. And also, while you got your credit card out, Buckeye Scoop. Buckeye Scoop. We have had quite a. I started tweeting out a link of different stories earlier today, and it was like, there's been a lot of good stuff, and it's like Tuesday, and it's not even noon yet when I was sending those tweets out. We had great X's and O's stuff from Ross Fulton on sort of what he's expecting from the Ohio State defense and why it could actually be better in the college football playoff than it was last year. We had a really good recruiting breakdown from Mark Givler on some of the new names to know, and the guy who could be probably the best player in Ohio State's class in the class of 2022. And then Alex Gleitman had really, really good stuff, not only on Taiwan Malone, but also a whole bunch of the here's what I'm hearing from my sources on the what's going on in practice right now. And I read all that. We did not share all of that here because you need to be a subscriber to get it. But he had a lot of the questions you guys were asking are the questions that he was answering on that in that post, in his ADEC post. So again, not that much. That a membership at Buckeye Scoop is like the price of a crappy chain store pizza for a month. And if you sign up right now, your first month is going to include the Nebraska game and the Penn State game. So seems like a good time to do that. And
as you're talking about that, Nevada Buck just dropped a practice report from one of his sources, which includes a little bit about a guy we haven't talked about. We could have talked about Tai Hamilton in terms of the 3 techs.
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy who's going to be, can't believe we missed him talking about, other guys. I mean, that's a guy who already lost his black stripe. Good family. We know he's got the genes. And so that's definitely a guy to watch. Tom, are you still doing the morning scoop? Because I have not been on this week, so I do not know if the show. No, I did listen to you and Ross going over the X's and O's of the defense, which was good.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm reading Nevada Bucks report now. Ooh, interesting stuff on the backup quarterback spot. That's interesting. That is, and I'm not selling right now. That is interesting. There's a name that we've heard that I think there's maybe a little confirmation that there may be a backup quarterback. That's intriguing. Yes, had Ross Fulton on this morning to talk about his work on how this year's defense is going to look different, why it's going to look different, and why that might make it better against Clemson than it was last year, which is kind of intriguing. And had Mark Giveler on Monday. He went and scouted Zen Michalski. The C is silent, as Mark. This is the stuff that you learn when you are like Mark and you go scout these guys in person. It's not Michalski, it's Michalski. So he went to scout Zen Michalski in person, talked to him about why he was committing to Ohio State. Really good conversation there. So those are the first 2 episodes this week. And I don't know, might have, since you're getting jealous, maybe I'll have you on for tomorrow. We'll see if you can make it for the Wednesday show. But yeah, we'll. It's never a lot shortage of stuff to talk about these days. So we'll have plenty more. You can find the Morning Scoop and all of our great podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. There are like 12 shows on the Buckeye Scoop podcast network right now. If you cannot find a show that you are intrigued by and want to listen to, you probably just don't like podcasts.
Yeah, attack the audience, Tom. That's a good job. Blame them. That's what I like.
If you don't like it, it's a you problem.
Cram it with walnuts, ugly. That's a Simpsons thing. It's nothing personal. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap it up, Tom, and say goodbye to everybody. Thank you all for listening. And please continue to support the show as you have. Rate us, review us. We do appreciate that. 5 stars only. 4 stars is first loser. Is that right, Tom?
5 stars only in my mentions.
All right. We will talk to you guys later. Have a good one.